Good afternoon and welcome to Pop Talk. I'm Hannah Petrie, Unitarian Universalist minister and proud board member of POP, that's Pasadena's Organizing for Progress, leading Pasadena to become the model progressive city of the 21st century. And I'm joined by my co-host, author, filmmaker, and Pasadena Weekly columnist, Ellen Snortland. Today on our show, we have a conversation with retired county sheriff, Clyde Terry. We'll get his take on the rare police conviction that occurred this week in Minneapolis, as well as hear about his involvement in Emerging Leaders Academy. Clyde, welcome to Pop Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm going to jump right in here and acknowledge off the bat that we could talk for weeks because this is such a complicated tapestry with lots of threads, and you pull on one thread and it ravels a bunch of other ones. So acknowledging that, what was your reaction when the 3 counts came back guilty? And what does that mean for you going forward in terms of your vision? And I'm going to shut up now.
Well, I think me, like most people, when we saw the video initially, it was like, what is he thinking? You know, I couldn't believe that was still happening, you know, in the 21st century, especially with all the, post Rodney King, all the other atrocities that happened in law enforcement and all the updated training we did, you know, as a supervisor, you know, and as a person who taught force, I was like, whoa, like that can't be their policy. And so I was seeing things that were coming in saying, oh, well, that's part of their training. So that's an authorized technique. And I was like, I don't think that's an authorized technique, to come to find out that it wasn't, right? And it may have been in the dinosaur ages, but it just wasn't in the 21st century. And so when the verdict happened, I thought, wow, that's great, because what he did was not in an alignment and consistent with who we are as cops and the oath that we took. And all the cops that I've talked to felt the same way, out the gate, all the way through. And then, you know, but there was this time in between that happening, the riots, the election, and all of that stuff, that there were people who kind of shifted sides, because it was either being a pro-Trump or, and if you were pro-Trump, then you were pro-police. So then they kind of like, you know, it was one of those things where you had to either be all in or all out, and which is kind of crazy. So then people began to defend the action, saying, well, you know, they went through his criminal history. And I'm like, okay, well, if that's the case, then that means it's premeditated murder then, right? Because we're looking at someone's past, and then we're justifying the amount of force that we're using based on that person's past to do whatever we're doing to justify this. And then when you hit people with that, it didn't make sense to them. But, you know, it's, you know, but, you know, there's just people who are caught up in their emotions and feelings about political views, and it became more political as opposed to what's right and wrong. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to young people? Have you been able to talk to any young people between the verdict and now, by any chance? It's just happened like what, 3 days ago, 4 days ago?
Tuesday. So yes. So well, let me kind of add something to the last question.
Yes.
Is that a lot of people in law enforcement, the fact that I was involved in an incident that ended up in Stephen Covey's 8 Habits of Highly Effective People, because we took a step forward. I was involved in a shooting, and we stepped forward and apologized to the community, right? We said we don't pick the battle zones, right? We adapt to them. So if somebody starts shooting at us, or somebody does something, we don't get to say, hey, time out, let's go to the desert where no one gets hurt and do this. We're given a set of circumstances, and we have to respond to that set of circumstances in that, wherever that place is. And when we came to the public and we played the 911 calls and we played the videos of everything that happened, the community took our side. and told Jesse Jackson to go back where he came from, you know, and back then they said that had never been done, and if law enforcement started doing that, that would create a whole nother existence in the world of law enforcement. So Sheriff Baca at the time got credit for it, but it was our idea. And Stephen Covey wrote about it in A Habits of Highly Effective People, talking about leadership and taking responsibility. So with that being said, I think a lot of us were happy that law enforcement actually stepped up, and like the chief and all the detective that had been around, he's old school. So if there's anybody to deprogram, that it was the homicide detective. And he said, no, it was uncalled for, right? So the fact that we're stepping up and calling out things is a completely new distinction for us in law enforcement. So I thought that was a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah. And we're talking about LA County.
Right.
Do you know of other jurisdictions that have followed suit?
I'd say larger markets, Chicago, New York, LA, Atlanta. I think they're following suit. But to your last question, I have a nonprofit that I created after a young kid was killed in the city of Compton, where I worked back in 2007, and 2000. Right after that, I started working with Pete Carroll's organization called A Better Los Angeles, where I started working with gang intervention workers. And if you had asked me would I be doing anything with anybody coming out of prison, I'd have been like, yeah, put them back in, right? Because that's where I was. Because I grew up in the inner city. I grew up in the Midwest, where heroin addicts would post Vietnam were coming back and would be frozen to death from with needles in their arms. And so I didn't like drug dealers. I didn't like drugs. Our house was broken into when I was in high school, and all of our Christmas gifts were stolen, all of our food was stolen. So I didn't like burglars. And when I was 10 years old, I was molested, right? So I didn't pick my profession. A 10-year-old child picked my profession, right? Because I became a protector. And I didn't understand that until I started doing transformational work and realizing that the thing that was driving me and the thing that was running my life was a 10-year-old kid. Well, as I began to, when this young kid was killed, I said, there's got to be something. There's got to be a better way, because I felt like what I was doing. When I came in 1991, we had 19,000 people in custody. Now here we are in 2017, and there's 2007, and now there's 19,000 people in custody. So I'm like, we haven't done anything in these years to change the dynamics. So whatever we're doing isn't working, right? We can't just keep. We can't we had this saying on our report: we can't arrest our way out of a problem. So we have to come up with another solution. And so with that being said, I created a nonprofit called, so I worked for Pete Carroll. After that, I created my own organization called Emerging Leaders. And I started working with people coming out of prison. Now, I had no desire to do that. I just got called to it, and I surrendered. And it's been the most fulfilling thing in my life, and I had to make a choice whether I retire from the sheriff's department or trying to do both. In 2016, I worked, 2015, I worked 353 days without a day off, running my program and working as a field supervisor on the sheriff's department. And I realized I could have done it again, but I didn't want to. And so I was like, what's my passion? What does my heart really call? What's really calling to my heart? And it was to work with young kids, because I saw the impact. I saw what it looks like when you have a community where fathers aren't present. What happens when you have a community that's been infiltrated with drugs and hopelessness. And so my work was to create that. But as I started doing the work, I realized that the people who were criminals were victims of someone else. They had been molested, they had been abused, they had been, all of these things that had happened to them, they had been bounced around from system to system. And I was like, wow, I understand that these people have been victims. That's no, because I'm thinking, who would like ingest drugs in their body and do all of this stuff, not unless they're running from something. And as I began to work with people, I began to dig deeper into that and see more. And then I began to humanize them more for myself. And what the system does anytime something happens, especially with minorities, is first we criminalize, to dehumanize, to justify, right? If you ever see anything happens, it's criminalized, dehumanized, justify. And it's like, I don't care. I do care, but I really don't care what a person's past criminal history is. If I don't know that going into it, it doesn't justify my behavior right now. Right? Now, at the end, I might say, oh, well, yeah, this guy was a murderer. He was a rapist. He was a child molester. So, okay, granted, he should have gone to jail. He had a propensity for violence. I understand that you have used this, but I don't know that going in. So that doesn't justify then me doing whatever I did, because that means that would be premeditated, right? So with to lastly answer that last question is that I work with a lot of young people. So after the verdict, I talked to some of my students, and they said, I asked them about the verdict, and they said, yeah, it's great, man. I was happy. This is how I felt about it. And I'm glad that other police officers stepped up. They were surprised that other cops had stepped up and testified against other cops.
Well, that's what surprised me the most. Don't they call it, no one's supposed to cross the blue line? But it seemed like they did.
Well, the reality though is that that's not true. I've seen people, I've heard of it, but people that I worked with, and when I got in the car with guys, I don't care what race they were, and when I got in the car with guys, it's like, I'm not going to jail for you. I'm not going to jail for you, and I'm not sacrificing anything for you. And guys were really clear about that. So it's like, if I use force, if I do anything, then let me justify what I did. You tell what you saw. Don't tell what I want you to tell. Tell what you saw. And I'm going to tell why I did what I did, and then let that sort itself out. But I'm not going to jeopardize my family and my house and all of that for you. And so most of the guys that I worked with were great guys, and that's the way they operated. Now there's some people that felt like contempt of cop was, there's guys that had that, but there was guys who would come in and see that they were working with somebody and go, hey, Sarge, I don't want to work with them.
Mm-hmm. So the blue line's more of a fallacy.
It's look, if you go all the way back to Mulholland Falls and you go back to those days, although they made great stories, and they actually, a lot of those things did happen. You got to remember, back then, law enforcement was through nepotism. It was family after family member. That's why it was hard for minorities to get into law enforcement, because it was a controlled environment. If you could almost trace the lineage of the training officer from the attitude of the officer at a particular time, you could trace the lineage. But over time, we moved away from that. People begin to see, even people who are now executives were the guys on the street doing all that stuff when they had more latitude, but they realized, like, that's not who we are. That's not why I joined this job. And I don't want to be that guy. So when they got to be, or they did it because they went along to get along. And when they got to a place where they can make a change in the system, they start a change in policy. They begin to make a change in policy. I don't think anybody's going to change the system, because it's a system.
What do you mean?
Well, once you set something in motion, so here's the thing. I was saying earlier, before everybody got on, is that this whole thing, racism, all of that is complex. It's not as simple as, you know, if racism was a pocket on my jacket, I could cut that pocket off and then say, okay, that's it. But it's not. It's woven into the fabric of America. It's even woven into the infrastructure of America, the way the freeways are designed, the landscape of our cities. Like racism was woven into all of that. So how do you get rid of racism in America without destroying the whole thing, without tearing the whole thing apart? So if you pull the string called racism in America, the whole shirt would fall apart. America's not going to let itself fall apart like that. So if we understand that, then how do we best navigate the system, right? Because you could take the greatest people in the world and put them in a system, and they're now compromised by the system. So I'll give you an example of what that looks like in real time. So I'd worked undercover for about 2.5 years on a FBI task force, and we were taking like millions of dollars of drugs off the street, you know, kilos of cocaine, you know, big quantities. And so we were doing RICO cases, organized crime cases. And when I came back to patrol, I couldn't arrest somebody for a rock when I understood the game was so much bigger than that. So the person who's using is not a criminal. That's a mental health issue. The person who's selling is a criminal, but the person who's using is using to escape a reality, right? So
yeah. It's kind there's so many models like that in the United States. It's like I wanted to make sure that I found out if you've read Chasing the Scream.
no, I've never read it.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, I highly recommend it for law enforcement because in a lot of I put it in the chat in case
Okay.
you want
Oh,
to.
was that the Amazon thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's Chasing the Scream. And it's a bunch of law enforcement people who are very pro decriminalizing drugs because it's, we go after the little fish and it's the larger fish that are, you know, if we made it a mental health issue, it would undermine the economy of drugs, which is ginormous, as you well know.
But we're not going to do that because the U.S. economy thrives considerably off of the black market economy. And so, but so let's take, for example, I find a person on the street that has a rock, and I say, Hannah, look, take your rock and crush it, and let's take your pipe and crush it. Go get help. Because I know that we're going to do Prop 36. By the time I write the report, you're already out of jail. Right? So you're now in drug court, right? So I say, because I understand the bigger picture. You've never been arrested, but you have a drug problem. So now I'm going to arrest you. So you already have some problem that you're dealing with that hasn't been addressed. So now I'm going to arrest you, and now you have a felony. So I've just exacerbated a problem. Right? So I'd rather you go get help. But here's the dilemma that I'm now in. It's a felony. And I say, go crush, I crush your rock, crush your pipe, and then 20 minutes later, you go rob somebody because you need to get money now, because the money that you had, you spent on the rock that you had, on the meth or rock cocaine that you had, or the heroin. And now you go rob somebody. In the midst of that robbery, you end up harming that person, right? Now, someone else is a family member, so you say, well, I wasn't going to harm anybody, but Clyde took my rock and made me crush my rock and crush my pipe. So I wanted to get high. So I went and robbed this person, not with the intent to hurt them, but I ended up hurting them because I committed this crime. Now, your family members, I'm sorry, not your family member, but the person you harm, their family member is going to go, well, if the cop had done his job, yeah, my family member wouldn't be dead or wouldn't be harmed. So, so the dilemma is, and there's so many cops who are like that, and we roll the dice. There's so many guys that roll the dice, but it's a system. Right. So it's a system. So if I do that, if I take that chance and you go commit the crime, then I'm basically hanging myself out there. But guys do it all the time because they understand that it's not helping our system. And at some point, is an arrest stat worth the damage it's going to cause? You know, if that person is a functional addict and they're still taking care of their home at some level, they're still there for their kids. The system doesn't have to raise their kids. So when you're out there in the community and you see all of this, you start looking at the bigger picture and you're not so caught up in arresting somebody for a statistic. You're about really making a difference in the community. But again, we're in a system. And
yeah, and I have to say that I think systems do change very, very, very slowly. I mean, the number of states that are going to be signing on to decriminalizing marijuana, for instance, you know, that is now going to have a snowball effect, and is happening more and more and more and more. And the thing that's I think impressive about Chasing the Scream is that there are countries, not as big as the U.S., but we can do things state by state, that have really put drugs into the mental health system, and it works. Right. Portugal being a main one, but
well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just drugs is one of the problems, but then you go into but now here's the thing. Because it now hit suburbia, right? It's no longer a criminal issue. It's now a mental health issue. Yeah. It should have been a mental health issue a long time ago. But what do you do? What do you do now with all the families that have been destroyed because those families have been, you know, members of those families have been incarcerated because for drug use as opposed to giving them mental health support. But like all the suburbanites, now they're getting mental health support. They never got a criminal history. And so let's move forward 10 years from now. So a person says, I was an addict. I got help. My life isn't like this. And then they go, so Clyde, how come you can't get your stuff together? And I go, but yeah, I was an addict, but I got arrested.
You got a criminal record.
I got a criminal history. So when I go to an employer doesn't look at me as just a person who had an addiction, who had a mental health issue at a particular time and got help. They look at me as a felon, right? And so when you talk about redlining, if you guys are familiar with redlining, you know, it's just another version of redlining.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you don't think there's much hope for legalization on any wide scale?
Legalization, legalization for what?
Well, yeah, like just, you know, decriminalizing drugs and drug use and making it more of a mental health care.
So use, I would say yes, we should decriminalize use and have it be a mental health issue.
Right.
Sales should be, my feeling is that sales should be taxed to the max for things like meth, heroin, crack cocaine. And then you look at and what's really, we live in a hypocritical world. So let's just start from there. And I mean, that flows throughout through the spiritual community, all the way through the criminal community, from the highs to the lows. It is hypocrisy everywhere. And so I just think there's a lot of hypocrisy. So it's going to be, I think that it's all contextual and, you know, based on the various situations. So
what are you hopeful about?
Well, I'm hopeful that because we have new people that are coming into the system, new people that are coming to law enforcement, that this is a tipping point. What happened with George Floyd is a tipping point. Now, here's the thing. I think that we should be responsible, though, because when we become overzealous in a system, then you end up, there's no balance in the system. So you don't overdo something to correct for all the things that weren't done before. So now you're going to convict every police officer and throw every police officer under the bus for something that happened. And then you tilt the scales. And then this is my experience. And I tell people this all the time. The pendulum's going to swing constantly, right? Now, if we don't, post Rodney King, we put all these things in place, but I don't care what laws you change. If you don't change the actual narrative, then it's just words on paper, right? So how do you change the consciousness of America? Right? How do you change the conscious? Because this is a deeper thing than just dealing with police and a policy that's written. How do you change the consciousness of America? I'm 6'1", 250 pounds. When I walk into a room, people don't necessarily see me as an ex-cop, right? So and these are good people, right? So and then they go, oh, I can breathe because you seem cool, right? But that's something I deal with on a daily. I'm not offended by it, right? Because I've grown up in it, right? So so how do we change that dynamic? So even like again, even the most gracious person in America still has their apprehensions when I walk into a room, not unless I look a particular way. If I'm in a suit and then maybe I'm safe. Or if I meet you at a plush hotel and that's a safe environment, or I meet you at a Landmark, it's a safe environment. But if I pass you on the streets at 6 p.m., it might be a little different, right? I understand that. I'm not offended by it, but I understand it. I can't be offended by it because I don't know anything else. I don't know anything else. And so I think what's going to happen, like my son sees, like he sees no color really, because he grew up in an era where his friends were everything. He didn't grow up having to fight battles. Now he's learning by all the stuff that's happening, right? But his kids, my grandkids, when he has kids, will grow up in a world where it'll be more inclusive. And I think that those people coming into law enforcement will bring a new life, a new vision to law enforcement. But on this end right now, we're changing policy based on what happened with George Floyd, based on what happened with Breonna Taylor, based on those things. We're changing policy, but by the time the policy catches up with the people in the profession, they have to unlearn all the stuff that they learned for 2 decades.
I'm gonna just suggest that if something doesn't seem possible, then people are not gonna try to do it. I mean, if I've been told all my life that it's not possible for a woman to defend herself,
right,
I'm not gonna even try.
Right.
And that's my mission. Now, if there's, I have a feeling that there are a lot of cops who are of a mindset it's either this or it's that.
Yep.
And mindsets don't allow for other views unless they experience the possibility.
Right.
And I have this fantasy that we do foreign exchange programs with our cops with cops in Norway. They don't carry guns.
No.
They have to solve problems without guns. And yeah, I know people say, yeah, Norway is not as big as the United States. Well, it just happens to be exactly the same population as Minnesota. And so even if state by state, if Minnesota started swapping cops between Norway and Minnesota, they could actually see a possibility that doesn't currently exist. And that's how people experientially shift.
Well, there is a great possibility. I've seen a major shift in, I retired a few years ago, but I saw a major shift from the Rodney King version to now.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a major shift, but you're turning a ship around in a cup of water. Because I think one of the things that would make a difference is if we had a national training center where all cops were trained the same, so we all had the same policy, right? Because it's like me coming to all 3 of your houses and you have different rules, and then I have to remember what rules. But then the world is judging me by the rules of Los Angeles, but I live in South Carolina, right? If I'm in a small market where I grew up with the people, I went to school with those people, I know those people, where there's only 5 deputies or 5 police officers in the whole city and county, then, and we all know each other, we know each other's parents and all of this stuff, that's great. But when you look at a market like Los Angeles, where there's maybe 25,000, well, there's probably about 25,000 police officers in Los Angeles County, right? For what, 15 million people? So take that 25 million divided by 3 for 3 shifts, and then take that 3 shifts and divide that by 3, because you have detectives and people in specialized units. So right now, as we speak right now, there's probably less than 2,000 police officers on the streets of LA County policing 15 million people, right? So, so I made it my purpose. I made it my practice to get to know people in the community. But sometimes you're so busy, you know, in a slower city, you can do that. But sometimes you log on, as soon as you log on, you're already 10 calls down, right? There's a TV show that I'm working on called The Next Call, and it deals with that. You go to a murder, you log on, your first call, you start off at a murder. And then you're waiting there until you get additional units to come, and then you go answer the call, and people go, "What the hell took you so long?" You go, "Well, I was on a murder." And they go, "Well, that person is dead. Why did I gotta wait?" Right? Mm-hmm. And then you got to keep your wits about you not to snap on this person, because you're talking about a human life. You know, so, but if that same incident happened 30 years ago, maybe you would have had a use of force, right? But today you don't, right? Because everything is documented now, you have to document it. So it's made people change their attitude about force. And now when you're a supervisor, you got to make sure that they change. If not, you're going to be writing a whole bunch of force reports, right? So we now embody and empower people to do the right things when they go out in the field. But our younger generation, they want change and they want to make a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I was wondering is, you know, while you were working, how did the LA County police force kind of evolve, you know, over the last 30 years since Rodney King? How has it changed, and are there other changes you would like to see happen?
Well, I think one is us stepping up instead of, so contrary to however people feel about Sheriff Baca, he was always an advocate for the people. Mm-hmm. And he would always tell us, so my personal feeling is that he was undermined by the people below him, right? Mm-hmm. Or the leaders that were his subordinate leaders that should have been supporting him. He was undermined by those people. But he was always an advocate for the people. So we were always ahead of the game. He was like, well, whatever the higher standard is, we're gonna write our policy based on the higher standard. So if the federal standard is the highest standard, then we're gonna write our policy based on the federal standard. So in that way, we can't go wrong, right? And that's how we wrote our policy. So I think that's one thing, is if we hold ourselves to a higher standard, you're still gonna have people fall through the cracks, but hold yourself to a higher standard, not the minimal standard, right? That's one thing. The other thing is they're talking about applied immunity. In our department, I thought that's been in existence for a long time, because if you do something outside of policy, the department doesn't support you. The department will not take care of you. So you're on your own, because you're not operating inside the guidelines of law enforcement. So I think one of the things that will make a difference is if law enforcement held itself accountable, instead of waiting to be forced to do something, that we stepped out and called a foul, and that we were willing to expose our people when they did something wrong, right? If we know that they did something wrong, not based on public opinion. Because like the shooting that happened in Columbus, mm-hmm. Yeah, at face value, you don't know that she's 16, right? You don't get somebody's credentials when you pull up. You just pull up, and things evolve in front of you. And the thing that's really funny is a lot of people that say what they say, and then we take them and put them in simulation course, they end up killing the wrong people.
Sure.
Right? Because they have to make a decision, and they have to process all that within seconds. And so he saved another girl's life.
That's what I was gonna say, that he also prevented someone from getting hurt.
Yes. But and so that's where we have to be careful of it, of doing a blanket thing. Every time the police do
Yeah.
something, then we blanket the police. And there should be accountability. This I'm saying, this thing is so complex.
Right.
Politics in America, race relations in America, politics in America, and the justice system in America is so complex that it's not a one, let's cut off the pocket and it's a resolved issue. There's so many different moving parts to it. So it, and I think, Ellen, to what you were saying is let's take a step back and look at and address all of these things from a collective, not just one dimensional, not just one thing, but let's look at it from a collective. um, you know,
I'm eager to hear a success story from some of your students in
Yeah,
the emerging leadership program.
let's hear about that.
Yeah.
so a lot of our students when they begin to, and so I always tell people, and I tell people I put a lot of people in Landmark, and so I always tell people Landmark doesn't do anything, I don't do anything, all we do is remind you of who you've always been. You just forgot who you are, and when they begin to remember who they are, you see amazing things open up inside of them, right? And so my goal is understanding the totality of everything, the system and all of that, is that let me show you how to maneuver through the system so that you're not a victim of the system, right? So you've been conditioned to take the deal. You've been conditioned that you're supposed to be this. No, you're not. So let's have you recreate yourself. And so I had a one student who's transgender, who hated the police, and she was brought in by one of my students who was a white supremacist, neo-Nazi, right? So and so he says, "Oh, he's got this really raspy voice. He says, oh, you got to come. He's the greatest guy in the world. I'd give my life for him." And he's telling, she's like, "I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go." But she comes. We tap into what really makes a difference for us. She wanted to be an advocate for the trans community. And so, and she wanted to make films. So we got it. We cleared her mind. She was a drug addict and been in prostitution, and had been in every prison in the state of California, men and women's.
Wow.
And she went on to go to LA Film School, and then got accepted into USC Film School, and got to work with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg.
Wow.
And now she made a short film that got featured on Madonna's tour. And now she's working on some other projects, and she's an advocate now for the trans community. So she created that, and then I connected her with Mike Michelle, Ellen, you would know, and she's just thriving now, and I've had other students that have gone on to create their own clothing line, people that started their own businesses, and it's taking a person out of a condition or letting them know that there's a way to navigate the system, right? And I tell them, like, look, I'm here. I can tell you how this is going to go. If you're out there committing crimes, this is what's going to happen, right? If you're involved in anything that's major, you're one traffic stop away from going to jail, because somebody's going to get caught. They're going to tell on you, and you're going to end up going to jail for doing some federal time. So I give them the reality from the police looking at them and how they get caught. And it's like, so you can, if you want to do your life on an installment plan, you can, or you can live into your higher self. And so my goal and my intention is to create higher consciousness. And so I do classes. I've had a class full of Mexican Mafia and Aryan Brotherhood, and walked out, and these guys are like, "Man, I don't know who you are, but I love you." And I've had Bloods and Crips who are like, "Man, I never thought I'd be cool with the police, but you're like my big brother."
Yeah. Have you noticed a pattern that when people get savvy about navigating the systems, that when they tap into their true selves, they frequently become artistic?
Mhm.
I've seen that a lot
Yeah,
myself.
I think that people become creative in their own ways because, you know, forgetting who we are, and then we assimilate into the world and we become what the world thinks we should be. Um, I think a lot of that is where a lot of our just where a lot of our stress comes from, um, are wanting to check out. But when people start to like find the little kid that lost themselves, that found the like the dreams, and they start to feel something, they start to get life back. And that's the goal, is how do you give life back? And so, I'm still an advocate for the people. I'm still a cop as an advocate for the people. But here's the thing, I'm not an anomaly. There's so many cops out there that give the stories you never hear. Like, you go to a call and somebody says, they get on the MDT, and they say, hey, can you guys all meet over here? And we meet somewhere, and they say, yeah, I just went to this call, man, and the family is good people, but they don't have any food. You guys, can everybody just put in $10, $20 or whatever? And guys have gone back and bought food for families. Guys have gone, bought Christmas stuff for people. There's so many good people out there that love that have a love-hate relationship with the police, but we do so many things that never, ever get shown in the press. And
Do you get coverage? Because I think the whole ethic of if it bleeds, it leads is at play a lot. And it's like, hey, people did good today is not a huge headline grabber. Do you get coverage?
um, what you mean with emerging leaders, or
Yeah, with emerging leaders, do you get good coverage?
I did. Christine Devine did an amazing story on us. Tina Ezedine from Channel 4 did a great story on us back a while ago. There are people that have done great stories on us right now because of COVID. Agape was giving us space to teach our classes, and the Goodwill, an amazing woman, Janet McCarthy she's the CEO of the Goodwill Long Beach, gave us space to run our classes. But then COVID came, and they had to look out for their employees, so that kind of took away. So what I'm doing now is I'm using our services. I'm partnering with a recovery place down in Orange County, and then I'm working with another program here in the Long Beach, LA, Compton Watts area, where I'm giving the transformational services to young people. So I'm on Zoom all week. I'm on Zoom all week, where I'm on the road down to Orange County, doing this. But anywhere I can go to make a difference with young people, to give them the vision of something else. A friend of mine just asked me if I would go into the youth authority and do some work with them. So anywhere I can go and share my gift, then I'm going to go do that, because to not do that would be disrespectful to my higher powers. So
Do you work with Homeboy Industries at all?
I've done some stuff with them, and a lot of my students have gone over to Homeboy Industries, and they've taken our teachings over to Homeboy Industries. And I've had people from Homeboy Industries come into my program as well. Yeah. And I think the work they're doing over there is tremendous. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I bring to the game is that I can see it from all sides. I can see it from, growing up in the inner city. My parents grew up in Marion, Alabama. So that's where the March from Selma to Montgomery actually originated. My great grandmother was one of the first people to start the voting rights thing for people, the voting drive. So she's like one of those Rosa Parks people. She was there before Rosa Parks, but Rosa Parks got so I come from that family. I come from that background. So because I've been through that, I grew up around that, I get to reconnect with my elders and talk about that. And then being on the streets, being a cop, being in combat as a Marine, and doing what I do now, gives me so much access to so many things that I can share with people. And so like my students are like, oh, when I look at you, I see you as being this refined guy. I don't see you as being a kid that was molested. I don't see you as being, you know, somebody that's been through this or would know this or would know this. And I go, yeah, because I'm not my circumstances. I have circumstances. I'm just not my circumstances. And when you love what you do, you don't have to worry about getting paid. The money will come to you. And I love what I do. I love making a difference. This is just an extension of me being a cop, right? So when I was a cop, our job is to serve the public. And today's suspect is tomorrow's victim, right? So I don't discount him as a victim because he was a suspect yesterday. I'm going to give him the service. And I'd say most cops are that way. Most cops are that way. And we have a system, and that system can be transformed. And I think the leaders that are in law enforcement now and the events that have happened, especially over the last year, have really opened the eyes of people to say we have to do something different. Mm-hmm. Right. And I would always tell people, let's do something different before somebody makes us do it. And then when somebody makes us do it, then we resistant to it. Let's do it because we want to do it. And so I think that's what's happening with leaders now is they're like, we want to make this change.
So if people want to volunteer or donate, they reach you through emergingleadership.org.
Emergingleaders360.org.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I have somebody working on my website because a friend of mine's going to do it for me because I was paying for all of this stuff out of my pocket. So, he has to do something with the link because we changed banks. And so they have to put the link back in so that they can, but if people want to donate to us, they can go to Emerging Leaders 2014 at Gmail and donate to us at PayPal.
Super.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I feel like we could, like Ellen said at the beginning, we could talk for hours.
I want to say thank you guys, because here's the thing. It all starts with the conversation. Everything happens inside of a conversation. And if people aren't having the conversation, everything's not going to be peaches and cream, right? We have to deal with what's underneath all of it. And a lot of times people deal with it just from the color aspect, or they deal with it from the criminal aspect. There's so many different layers to it. And with all the distinctions of what it is to be a human being, there's just that many distinctions in what it is to create a better world. And I think we all have the capabilities of doing that. And can we do that? Can we let go of our view about law enforcement? Can we let go of our view about racism without judgment about it, right? So that we can actually make a difference. And I think that if we're having conversations like this, where there's no judgment and there's no rapid expectation of transformation, that we're turning this thing around, we're transforming, and get that we're transforming law enforcement, we're transforming the way we relate to the world and the community, that's an ongoing process. I think we can get somewhere, but people want it to happen overnight like that. And if we don't do it in transforming our own desires in life, then it's probably not going to happen with the organization. So if we have patience, but if you continue, like in the city of Pasadena, if you continue to bring this conversation to the people of Pasadena, then people start saying, what could I do?
Right.
What could I do to make a difference? If I run a group home, what could I do to make a difference with my young girls or young boys in the group home, so they don't feel like they're just a number where they're bounced around? Let's not fail our children till they get to the point where they feel like they have to join a gang or do criminal activity. And let's take some of the stuff off the plate of law enforcement so that we're not healthcare workers, mental health workers, that we're responding to criminal events, and then we can deal with those, and other people are dealing with those other things, that we collectively and synergistically come together as a body of people for our community. Like we are a community, not a segments of a community, like we're a whole, right? And I think if we do that, and people like you who are willing to host these conversations, I think we can do that.
Wow. Thank you so much for being on our show today, Clyde Perry. Did you have any final thoughts to share?
Just no, just keep doing what you're doing, and the people who follow you or listen, like, like, look at what could I do instead of waiting on someone else to do that can make a difference. You know, don't be the neighbor that doesn't know your neighbors. Like, get to know your neighbors, and if you have somebody that you could offer something to, then offer that service to them. Like, hey, I run this program over here, but I see your kids, they're sitting at home doing nothing. Would you like to, or my kids go to this program? Can your kids come and join it? It doesn't take much to do that. I mean, the person can say yes or no, but what if we just did that? What if we extended that? Because I'm a father to a lot of my son's friends who didn't have a father, but they got to watch me and me operate with my son, and because they watched how I did things, these became men with principles. And they go like, how'd you learn that? And they go, oh yeah, because I watched you. And I didn't even know they were watching me. So.
And did you say, are there volunteer opportunities at your organization?
There will be. Right now, because I'm doing stuff with Zoom.
Right.
If someone has something to offer that is outside of that, and I have kids that are like, say, they want to learn how to be a filmmaker. I could say, hey, I know somebody who makes films, or maybe they don't want to make films, but maybe if they got access to it, that it would give them an idea to look at their life from a different perspective, from an empowering place. That if I turn my life into a film, how could I empower people with my story as opposed to me being a victim of my story? Right. Just someone like Ellen, just sharing that experience with them, they go, oh, this is what storytelling is about. Right. So, whatever somebody feels they have to offer, be willing to just share your gift, and let's see what we can do with it. We never know. I mean, the creator knows, right? But we never know. So just if something hits you in your spirit that says, man, I should call that guy, or I should do something, then do it.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Thank you again for being on the show, Clyde. And that's all the time we have for Pop Talk. You can learn more about the good work of Pop at poppasadena.org. You can find this episode posted on Radio Jornalera's Facebook page. Please share widely, and it'll also be made available on Pop's website. We thank Radio Jornalera for their tech support and making Pop Talk possible. Viewers and friends, thank you for listening. Good night and good luck.
Thank you.